You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. This is our last program before Tuesday's elections. This morning we focus on the local race that has grabbed more attention than any other, the race for the Hamilton County Commission seat currently occupied by Bob Bedinghaus. It has been 36 years since the last Democrat, Vince Beckman, won one of the three seats on the commission. Usually, in the spring primary season, some brave or foolhardy Democrat makes bold statements that this will be the year of a Democratic breakthrough. But by the weekend before election, the only real question is how big the margin of victory will be for the Republican. But not this year. This year, the race features a three-way conflict. Bob Bedinghaus is a Republican incumbent. He was appointed to the commission in 1995 and won the seat in an election in 1996. Mr. Bedinghaus is a resident of Delhi Township. Todd Portune, the Democratic challenger, has been a member of the Cincinnati City Council since 1993. A third-party candidate, Paul Neighborhouse, is also in the race. Mr. Neighborhouse, a libertarian, owns a manufacturing business and has not previously held public office. This morning I am joined by Mr. Bedinghaus and Mr. Portune. Paul Neighborhouse was a guest a month ago on Newsmakers. One point I want to make here at the beginning, whatever else might be said about this race, both of these candidates and Mr. Neighborhouse on occasion have appeared together to debate the issues in front of many groups over the last 2 months, maybe as 12 or 15. No matter who wins, they should be complimented for their willingness to appear together and answer questions posed by folks like me and people in audiences. Both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
We're going to start with the obvious question. Bob, the central question in this race, and you could say it's coming from Todd, but I think it's on the voters' minds too, is the handling of the stadium issue by you and the other commissioners, particularly in negotiations with Mike Brown. One more time, how do you characterize the way that you handled that, looking back on it at this point?
Well, Dan, first of all, thanks for the last opportunity to get a chance for the two of us to appear together. It's been a good campaign up to now, and I'm looking forward, as I'm sure Todd is, to next Tuesday. Yeah. I think the best way to characterize how we've handled the situation is we've made the best out of a bad situation. We stepped into the situation back in 1995 when there was nobody getting anything done. The community was at a crossroads. The city had attempted through, with help from the county, with the Regional Stadium Task Force to see if we could come with a regional solution. Our regional neighbors really ran for the tall grass when the difficult decisions had to be made, and Hamilton County stepped up and provided the leadership when it was necessary. As we've gone along the way, there's certainly been good days and certainly been bad days. And
very specifically, though, I mean, not just about the levy and the general structure, but what about the specific contract with the Bengals? That's, I think, where the questions really are.
I think if you look at what we started out with, recognizing that both of these teams, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cincinnati Reds, were operating in a small market where a better lease arrangement with them than what they might get in New York or Los Angeles or something was the principal reason why we were in this to begin with. And the fact that we were left with very little negotiating ability after the city had settled a lawsuit, perhaps rightfully so, back in 1994, I think we got as good a deal as we could have gotten with the Cincinnati Bengals.
So you still believe it's as good a deal as you could have gotten?
I believe so. Now, certainly, critics will say the otherwise.
Todd, how would you characterize, because this issue is not just the substantive issue, but it's become the symbolic issue for this race as well. How would you characterize that whole deal?
It is symbolic, and it's symbolic of a larger problem in county government. And we talk about stadiums, not so much because that anybody likes to talk about it anymore, but because it is indicative of a way of approaching significant issues and interests under Mr. Bedinghaus and his administration that we cannot afford to have carried forward into the future. I don't fault Bob for proposing a sales tax, though the sales tax that he proposed would not have been voted on by the people and would have been twice as much as the sales tax that was ultimately approved in March of 1996. Give him credit for proposing a sales tax. Give him all the credit for that. The problem is, after the voters of Hamilton County voted that sales tax in, they wanted to put their trust and their confidence in Mr. Bedinghaus and the county commission to do the right thing, to protect the public's interest, to build these stadiums in a way that they were going to serve the broader interests of this community, and that did not happen. We had no auditing and oversight on the stadium. The cost overruns have been very well documented, and you've got a lease agreement with the Cincinnati Bengals that is considered to be the most lucrative in all of the NFL, which among other things obligates taxpayers, and really it's our children that we're talking about here, down the road to pay the Bengals ownership, whoever that may be at that time, upwards of $29 million just to play in a stadium that will still be paying off at that point in time. And that is the problem. We have a county that's $1.5 billion in debt. We've got a tax that is double the life that it was promised to be, and there is no plan at all by Mr. Bedinghaus to reduce that debt or to retire the tax early.
Bob?
It makes for great political rhetoric, Dan, to sit here and invoke the image that our children's children will still be paying for things. You know, somehow when Todd talks about additional cost at Paul Brown Stadium, it represents mismanagement. But yet he won't talk about the additional costs that are there at Fort Washington Way, a project that he's responsible for. So all of these projects are very difficult. All of them are complicated, difficult public works projects. It's easy to throw stones at the county because we're the people that are building it.
Isn't there a fundamental difference, though, in the sense that in Fort Washington Way, and we could get into, I'll ask Todd about that, in Fort Washington Way, it's a public works project for the public, whereas in Paul Brown Stadium, it's a public works project for a private entity.
Well,
and
sure, they took the easy one and we got stuck with the tough one. Let's be real here now. I mean, somebody had to step up and do the stadium project, and we did it. Now we took the risks that were associated with that, and we're gonna persevere through that.
Todd, what about Fort Washington Way? I mean, that has come in higher than was originally announced back when it was first proposed as this is what was going to happen.
That's right, and I've not tried to avoid that question or dodge that question. I'm very proud of the Fort Washington Way project. We all should be in this community, but you have a project that changed significantly in scope. The original trench still came in within the budget that was announced some years ago, but we had improvements to 3rd Street, we added the intermodal transit center, we dealt with a significant sewer problem, the combined sewer and sanitary sewer overflow problem down on the riverfront at the same time, and those were all additions to that project. The difference is Fort Washington Way versus Paul Brown Stadium, and you touched on part of it, a project for the public versus a project for private enterprise. Those additions and those changes all occurred through a public process, as opposed to a lot of these change orders just simply being approved behind closed doors, which is what happened on Paul Brown Stadium. But you've got with Fort Washington Way a project that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, serving hundreds of thousands of residents and visitors to our community every single day, in contrast to a stadium that's only open on 10 Sunday afternoons and only for those who can afford the price of ticket. But there's one other thing I have to add.
Right.
Fort Washington Way was not funded through a new tax and is not a debt project that we're going to be paying off years down the road.
Well, I think you are issuing debt, but this is the kind of doublespeak we find at City Hall, Dan. Unfortunately, he makes the accusation that somehow we're approving secret change orders. Well, how many change orders did the city of Cincinnati approve? How many went before City Council to approve?
Bob, every
Fort
single
Washington
one of the
Way?
additions to Fort Washington Way was a public vote in a public
I
process.
gave you the
Hold on,
opportunity
let
to
Bob.
talk. Let me have an opportunity to talk here. You know, let's be very straightforward. Paul Brown Stadium was a difficult project to complete. There's no question about that. We added cost to it, rightfully so, by moving it further west, by making sure that there was the land in between it to make the Banks project a reality, adding almost $100 million to it. It's a difficult public works project, but I think we've done a pretty good job.
I could just turn you guys loose, but I'm not going to. To try to move this forward a little bit, one of the issues that Todd alluded to here is that when you finance something with bonds, one of the basic principles is you can't issue the bonds over a longer period of time than the productive life of whatever it is that's being built. And now those bonds have been extended out to 32, 35 years? I hear, what is it?
32 years.
32 years, which is longer than Synergy. You know, it's longer. Is it longer than the lease?
Absolutely not. You look at the debt that's issued on the Bengals Stadium, and there's nothing there longer than 27 years. If you look at the debt that's issued, and the reason for that is the lease agreement with the Cincinnati Bengals is a 27-year lease agreement.
So it's exactly the same as the lease.
With the Cincinnati Reds, there are 32-year debt bonds out there, but we have a 35-year lease agreement with the Cincinnati Reds.
Todd, on the question of paying the bonds, which is the sales tax, are you concerned about paying off that sales tax, paying off those bonds? Will the sales tax maintain pace in light of potential future economic downturns, and I think more importantly in my own mind, the rising impact of untaxed web sales and catalog sales? Are you seriously concerned about that?
Absolutely, and it's more than just me. I think you have a number of financial analysts who have expressed their concern, and our own county auditor, Dusty Rhodes, has expressed his concern about what he characterizes as a risky financial scheme that is literally gambling with the future of this county.
Then why haven't the bank, the funding agencies that have bought the bonds, why aren't they seem to be happy with them?
Well, of course they're happy. They're guaranteed. There's insurance to cover some of the repayment that's in there, and essentially it all comes down to the full faith and credit of Hamilton County, and ultimately those bondholders will be paid whether there are sales tax revenues to support it or not. The real problem, though, here is the sales tax going to continue to grow at these rather historic levels uninterrupted for the next 32 or 35 years? If the sales tax grows at just 2% a year, it goes into a deficit situation and isn't adequate to cover the cost of the bonds.
Bob?
Well, I mean, I don't think we want to get into a mind-numbing discussion of municipal finance here, but
I'm
let me
sort of
just talk for
mind-numbed
just
anyway.
let me just talk for just a second in that area. You know, it is the professionals, the investment bankers who bought these bonds, who put their money on the line, who underwrote these bonds and said that it was a conservative financial model. We have a historic growth going back to 1971 when the sales tax was initiated of more than 7.25% growth in the sales tax. Just over the last 15 years, we have an historic growth in the sales tax more than 5%. In only 3 years, going back to 1971, has the sales tax failed to grow by more than 3%. We have a very conservative plan. Like I said before, it's easy to throw rocks at people that are doing things, but we've got the endorsement of the professional investment bankers out there who have embraced this project.
Okay. You're going to be glad to know we're going to take a break, and we're going to go on to some other things other than stadiums, so hang on right there. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes to talk about other issues. Welcome back. We're going to turn to some questions about the future. Todd, okay, we've talked about Paul Brown Stadium, et cetera, et cetera. One of the questions is the banks. What to do with the development of the rest of the riverfront to make that whole thing coherent. The third candidate in this race, Paul Neighborhouse, on this show, suggested that what ought to be done is that ought to be turned over to Mike Brown and Carl Lindner to develop, and the county should get out of it. Public entities, the new Port Authority, everybody should get out of it and turn it over to private interest. What do you think of that, and what do you think ought to be done?
Well, I'm not particularly in favor of turning over control of the riverfront any more to two individuals than has happened already. But yeah, I think that the bottom line is, with almost $1 billion of public investment already into the riverfront, private development is going to happen. We have approved the Port Authority. The city has identified, though we haven't finally taken the vote, and I'm not sure why the mayor hasn't asked for it, but who our recommended persons are going to be on the Port Authority, and I guess the county will do the same coming up. I think we let the Port Authority do their job and oversee that final development, but you're going to have an awful lot of private money that's going to go into the banks. The real important public feature that we need to be about now is the public park and the park space down on the riverfront, park space that actually would not be as useful as it may be if we didn't have the pilings driven in on Fort Washington Way, and that's an issue where I insisted that we do that, and we did.
Bob, one, the Neighbor House proposal, but then in a general sense.
I think Paul has some interesting proposals. This is one that I wouldn't embrace because I just think we've got really the the prize is there in front of us now. The whole reason to start down this path of Fort Washington Way, the 2 riverfront stadiums, was so that we could create an area that would ultimately grow into the banks, and that was what we had hoped this would come about from the very beginning. I know the county is probably going to take action on our appointees to the Port Authority on Monday, and we'll move forward there. I think that letting the Port Authority drive the bank's development is the key here. Getting the politicians, county commissioners, and city councilmen out of this, I think, is important. And I think that there's a very good analogy here in this community, and that's the Greater Cincinnati International, the Kenton County Airport Board.
Which you have been a member
I had
of.
actually served on it for a couple of years, but Kenton County owns the airport.
In Boone County.
In Boone County.
And the planes fly over western Hamilton
Planes fly
County.
directly over my house, which is an annoyance to me and my neighbors, but that's not the point. The point is that by putting people in charge of that airport, whose only responsibility it was to build a first-class, world-class airport, we got what we wanted there, and I think we can get the same thing with the banks.
Let me talk about a couple of other issues. One of the things that county commissioners do, there's a lot of things they don't do that I think people think they do, but one of the things is being part of the planning process for the county. Let's take a couple of direct things. One, mass transit. The thing that's immediately on the table is the light rail system from the airport to Mason. Where do you stand on light rail, and where do you stand on mass transit planning?
I think you may have stumbled on the one issue that we agree on. I oppose the current.
It's not by accident.
Right. I oppose the current I-71 light rail plan. I think that investing that much money in a single spine transportation system
Even
is
if
a
it's just
mistake.
the initial spine?
Even if it's just the initial spine. I think that that's too much money for that project. I think what we ought to be encouraging is more of the relationship that's growing between Queen City Metro and the Transportation Authority in Northern Kentucky, TANK, and putting together a regional bus system.
Could you imagine busways?
I mean,
dedicated roads for buses?
roadways. Actually, if you look at the I-71 corridor study, it shows that those high occupancy vehicle lanes pays off better than light rail.
Yeah, I think you have to have a combination of things, and I oppose the current proposal for the I-71 corridor because I don't think you lead with your most expensive spine, and the estimates are $600 to $800 million, and we all know the relationship between estimates to the true cost of projects in Hamilton County. That's going to be $1.5 to $2 billion if it's a penny. But I do think that you use the existing track that is in place. We're building a transit center down on our riverfront right now, and it's being designed to accommodate commuter rail. Make the connections from the boathouse to the east and Longworth Hall to the west, tie that into the transit center now while the riverfront is torn up. We can have passenger rail service from Lawrenceburg to Milford and all points in between, then freeing up the buses to make those cross-community, cross-neighborhood connections that are missing in the system right now.
Okay, I want to keep moving. A couple of other things. What about public funding for the Olympics? And what should the county's role, I'm not talking city council now, Todd, county's role be if you're elected?
Well, I oppose this effort right now to get public funding to support the bid effort. It was promised that that would be
Do you support the bid
private.
effort?
I think we need to, I think they're this close they need to submit the bid, but we need as public bodies to understand if this goes any further, what are they really asking the public entities to do and how much public money is going to be about it? I oppose public money for the bid, and frankly, I think it's going to be way too expensive for this community to embrace long term. Indianapolis's decision not to support this and not to be a part of this, I think is very telling, given the amount of money that they have invested on amateur sports facilities in Indianapolis.
Bob?
I clearly support the bid effort. I think that the work that Nick Veer and the Cincinnati 2012 effort has put together has bred an awful lot of regional cooperation that will benefit this community whether we get the Olympics or we don't get the Olympics. So I think the effort is good.
What about public funding?
As far as public funding, I think Nick needs to make his case to us. At this point, I'm a little skeptical, but I'm open-minded. At least I'm willing to listen to what they have to say.
One final question in this area. Todd, we've undergone nationally, but locally controlled welfare reform. How would you critique the way the county has handled welfare reform, and what would you propose in the future?
Well, I think that the county has done a fair job in the short term on welfare reform. But what you really have to look at are longer term issues and truly transitioning people from poverty to self-sufficiency. And in that area, whether it's support for child care or daycare, or whether it's housing subsidies and assistance, or whether it's having a transportation plan that's going to be in there for the long haul, or job training and skills training is going to be there for the long haul. Those are the real impediments to success long-term on welfare reform, and I think that there's more that the county can and should do there. But I don't limit welfare reform just to welfare reform of poor people. We need to quit the corporate welfare that exists, and we need to have leadership in the county that's willing to begin to say no to some of the big money special interests who have their hand out a lot more than poor people who are just trying to get a job.
Bob, welfare reform.
Back to the stadiums, unfortunately, but Hamilton County has led the state of Ohio in reforming welfare. We have cut the rolls by 2/3, saving over $160 million of taxpayers' money going out in cash benefits. We have done exactly what Todd is suggesting. I have fought hard for child care benefits for local working mothers against a very popular George Voinovich just a couple of years ago. And we are working on transportation issues, continued medical benefits, and child care.
There's some real challenges still out there.
There are real challenges out there, but the best indication of the success we've had is that when October 1st of this year came and the 3-year time limit hit us, in this community only 28 families met that 3-year time limit, compared to Cuyahoga County where more than 1,800 families met that time limit. And that, I think, is a great indication that we are reaching down and truly changing people's lives.
Okay, I want to go to one other section here. In the last few weeks, both of you have launched ads that have garnered a lot of attention, a lot of comments. And I want to play each ad and let the other person comment on the other person's ad. The first one we're going to take a look at is an ad by Todd Portune's campaign, and we'll take a look at that now.
Introducing the Commissioner Bob Bedinghaus action figure. You can make Bob build a new football stadium.
Uh-oh, we're going to need more money. Don't worry, the taxpayers will foot the bill.
You can help Bob buy stuff for the Bengals.
Here, Mike, the taxpayers bought you this basketball court and credenza for your office.
You can even help Bob run up a $1 billion debt.
Woohoo! I'll be long gone before we have to pay this back.
Bob Bedinghaus action figure comes complete with $1 billion in IOUs. Stadium and Bengals giveaways sold separately.
Bob, what do you think of that?
I've got more hair than that. You know,
That was modeled on me.
It's you know, the idea that he would try to use the Jesse Ventura action figure genre for local campaigning, I guess, is something that Todd thinks is important. I just happen to think that the idea of city council members and action figure is just kind of laughable.
City council, isn't it? Okay. Todd, you want to say anything about your own commercial?
Well, we tried to offer some creativity, to touch on very serious issues in a lighthearted way that don't cause the viewer to feel like they have to take a shower after they've watched the commercial that people tend to feel with some of the negative advertising.
You're warming
that takes
up for the
place.
next one.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the most recent Bob Bedinghaus commercial about Todd Portune.
What site is that?
Liberalportune.com. He's running for county commissioner against Bedinghaus, you know, the stadium guy.
Maybe we should vote for Portune.
Well, let's see.
Todd Portune thinks the curfew violates a juvenile's constitutional rights.
And Liberal Portune wanted cops to be able to turn in their guns and instead of jail, get free sneakers.
Uh-oh, Portune even supports gay marriage.
Whoa.
There's a reason they call him Liberal Portune.
I want to make something clear here. I said this was this was Bob Bedinghaus's commercial. This is a commercial put out and paid for by the Hamilton County Republican Party. It is not your commercial, even though it's about this race. Todd, given that, what's your comment?
I wasn't born yesterday either. I mean, this is clearly Bob's commercial. If it's anybody's commercial, Carl Linder threw down $100,000 to fund this commercial to save Bob Bedinghaus' seat. So, you know, I don't think the voters are that foolish that someone can hide behind this firewall that it wasn't their commercial. But the point is, this is the worst in political advertising that exists. And don't take my word for it. Take the Cincinnati Enquirer that called these ads a stretch of the truth. The local Republican chair, when called on some of the misstatements and distortions in the ad, said, well, to talk about the specifics misses the point. Gee, we just impeached a president of the United States for avoiding talking about the specifics and not being completely truthful and honest with the public. And the Enquirer this morning in their editorial, I know this is playing on Sunday, but
this is on Friday.
They talked about these ads. Liar, liar. was the headline. They said these kind of ads aren't designed to inform the public, they're designed to con the public and play on the uninformed.
Bob?
Without a doubt, the ads are accurate. There's just no question about that. And they are funded by the Republican Party, but they are on my behalf. I think the Republican Party also has a larger axe to grind in that they're concerned about Todd's ability to come back and run for mayor in the city of Cincinnati next year. However, Dan, the Republican Party was not the first organization to bring up gay rights, for example, which you might find the most offensive there. Stonewall Cincinnati lists Todd Portune on their website as one of their most important races this year. So, you know, for city council members on one hand to embrace the gay and lesbian advocacy groups, and then all of a sudden when it comes out in public to run away from it or somehow say that that's unfair, it's just not right.
I have to go. We're out of time. Vote this Tuesday and tune us in Tuesday night.